without further, Bob Henkel.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, share my passions, and hopefully a few ideas about how I think perennial farming systems can be a tool to help heal our ecological and our human communities. Mark gave a great presentation. Really appreciate setting this thing up. And like Dan said, I've studied with a lot of permaculturists from around the world, especially Jeff Lawton from Australia, Dan Doherty. These guys are really pushing the edge and bringing back perennial farming and perennial agriculture techniques and ideas to help heal the planet. And it's perennial agriculture, that's what gives me hope, that we can avert environmental disaster and not only heal the environment, but create opportunities as well. Climate change, entrepreneurial enterprise, community development, education, and fitness can all be addressed in a garden. So right now, as Mark said, our food system is dependent on oil and subsidies for growing, harvesting, transporting, and storing our food. It's being consolidated into large agribusiness conglomerates that own nearly 50% of the market share. We can be involved in our own food production, reduce our dependency on others in as little as 15 minutes a week of labor on average. Edible forest gardens are one aspect of perennial farming systems that can happen in our backyard. Imagine an edible forest garden carefully designed and installed in every neighborhood, teeming with nuts, fruits, berries, herbs, vegetables, and bring in your neighbors too. Compare this to the ecological disasters of lawns with no food value, no diversity, lots of high energy inputs, and for little value. Now, community gardens provide much more benefit and value than lawns, but they also require yearly planting, watering, weeding, so there's a lot of work there. With a long history in tropical climates, forest gardening is relatively new in the temperate climates, especially here in North America. But now, really exciting news is Seattle, Washington, a neighborhood has gotten together to create a 7-acre food forest project plan. They're in a neighborhood where 50 different languages are spoken, and they're using vegetables from all those different homelands, incorporating that into their site. Now, when I'm talking about forests, I'm really talking about an open woodland where sunlight's able to hit the ground so you can grow herbs and vegetables underneath fruit and nut trees. With an open canopy, the trees, the shrubs, the herbs, the vines, they all kind of grow together. They create layers from the ground all the way up into the canopy. And that way we're not in a monoculture. We are not dependent on just one crop for success. We have the ability to turn denuded pastures into an oasis. Imagine over 300 plants that not only provide food, but also medicine, fiber, fodder for animals, fertilizer, and fun and fitness. And based on mimicking the elements found in a healthy and natural forest, the forest garden is perennial, it's low maintenance, it sequesters carbon, and it restores landscapes. Perennial farming systems and perennial and permaculture design, like this example from Midwest Permaculture, focus on developing cooperative strategies between plants and animals to provide a largely self-maintaining system. Why fight nature? If we use the natural cycles of our ecosystem, they provide the maintenance of our garden. But to do this, we need a mix of native plants and proven exotics that will thrive in our climate. As a polyculture, they offer the ecological services that we need, plus abundant food production. We're learning so much more about plants and the various roles they play in nature. Plants, in cooperation with insects, soil microbes, organisms, and fungi, maintain a forest's natural cycle of cycling nutrients, creating multiple habitats, slowing for dispersing water. Edible forest gardens are organized around guilds of plants that are mutually supportive. Like currants, they provide delicious fruit and they grow in partial shade. They attract beneficial insects in the spring that have overwintered in comfrey. And comfrey is a good ground cover. It also draws nutrients deep from in the soil and brings that available to the pear tree and to the currants as nutrition. And gardening with perennials and self-seeding annuals, as Dave Jackie and Eric Tonzenmeyer wrote in their books here, not only brings food security, but restores our land and our spirit. Like a healthy forest, as the forest garden matures, it requires less and less human maintenance. So we become land managers and can sit back and enjoy their beauty and reap its benefits. Providing food locally is especially important for low-income families who generally spend nearly 35% of their income on food. And are they really eating more than high-income families that are only averaging 11% of their income on food? I think this is a social justice issue as well. Reducing the average transportation distance of our food from 1,500 miles to 0 helps reduce our carbon footprint. Our food, picked when ripe, will taste better, be more nutritious, and subject to less chemicals because we can choose the right varieties that are particular to our climate, and also those that are designed for taste, not for travel. The ecosystem, it was designed to provide for its own nutrition, and that's what we try to mimic. Our soils have taken millennia to be nutrient rich, and now industrial agriculture pours millions of tons of fertilizer to grow crops each year. Chop and drop mulching techniques mimic a forest leaf drop to build the soil fertility. An edible forest garden is dependent on the development of the soil food web. Soil organisms are nitrogen and carbon storage units. They decompose organic matter. They fix atmospheric nitrogen. They enhance the soil texture and feed on crop pests. All plants depend on the soil food web for their nutrition. We are just now beginning to recognize, as Richard Louv writes, that vitamin N, or nature, is critical to our health. I think people, if they're able to go outside and be rewarded with healthy and healing food, they're going to get outside more often. Perennial agriculture provides direct products like food, medicine, furniture, and even plants for sale. Now, food forests, they increase diversity and create habitat for multiple species. Perennial farming design restores degraded landscapes with systems for stabilizing slopes and reducing erosion. We focus on reducing our fossil fuel inputs and offset climate changes caused by greenhouse gas emissions with our shade creation, our air and pollution filtration, and the resulting carbon sequestration of growing plants and developing the soil food web. Creating food forests increases water infiltration and retention, which moderates flooding and drought cycles. It reduces the number of miles our food and other products have to travel. We reduce packaging, the use of chemicals, and offer opportunities for economic and entrepreneurial endeavors. These ecological services are what plants do naturally, and we're merely trying to imitate them and design powerful polycultures that can provide for some of our needs as well. We can be in charge of our nutrition, reduce our expenses, earn income, and develop greater food security, all while healing the planet and ourselves by giving us a reason to go outside, not just for maintenance, but to connect deeply with our environment in a meaningful way. Thank you.
So you've got a lot of examples in here. Once again, David's, I'm sorry, Bob. I was looking at David before I stood up, so thanks, Bob. And Bob's slides are going to be on our website to download. He's got some great examples. How many of these projects do you think there are out there that people have done, and how long?
Well, like I said, tropical climates, they've been going on for millennia, right? And they've been using multi-story layered agriculture for a long time. Back in 1981, a guy by the name of Hart in the United Kingdom, I think Shropshire, England, started a food forest there. And also there's a guy, J. Russell Smith, I think, created a book about perennial tree crops that really got a rage going in the 1950s. So this has really been going on a lot. Obviously, in our previous presentation, it was brought up about what about subdivisions and what's going on with that. So Vietnam, Thailand, Australia, there's a lot of this stuff that's happening where we're not restricted by that stuff. Here in this country, it's obviously since the 1990s.
So what about subdivision restrictions?
Right, substitute.
Well, but it strikes me that, and I'm curious to hear from other people here in the room, but it strikes me that what you're doing is not necessarily, this doesn't necessarily produce like, wow, we're now going to get $5 million of agriculture into my subdivision. This is actually, we're going to take these problems, these expenses that we have, and we're actually going to remove those from the ecosystem, or from the neighborhood. Is that right? So
well,
it's a
what we're doing,
problem,
like
right?
one project in Holyoke, Massachusetts, these guys just had a small little backyard, and their goal was just 2 handfuls of food a day throughout the whole season. That was their goal. And that's actually a pretty nice, achievable thing to do. with putting plants in
But
polyculture.
365.
365.
So it's not
Right.
2 handfuls of food during the month that strawberries ripen.
Right. Yeah, it was all year round, you know. And so if you start small and grow this, you know, like I said in one of those slides, it can just be a small little plot, 1 fruit tree, a couple other herbs hanging out together, and then build from there.
What questions does everybody have? I mean, you know, I was looking at that and I was like, wow, you know, when I see the list of crops go by that are part of this, this is not, you know, a grain-based thing. I mean, it's, you know, it's this is moving to, like, you know, Chinese thing. It's like, hey, if it, you know, if it moves or grows in the water or whatever,
well, like
let's find a way to eat it, you know?
Yeah, it's like Eric Tonsenmeyer and Dave Jackie. I mean, they've got their edible forest garden outlining like 600 different species of plants to put in use here. Eric Tonsenmeyer has gone on to create a book called Perennial Vegetables.
So is there, you know, you talked about the metrics about, you know, how much you're producing and everything. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. How much, I mean, is this more efficient use of an acre, or is this just a different, you know, so if I looked at an acre in a neighborhood.
Well, let's take a look at that lawn. What's it providing? For some people, just having the security of a nicely mowed lawn feels good to them, and they can't handle, like, oh, I got a bunch of trees or shrubs or native plants that it just wigs them out a little bit. But what we're doing here, we're in a forest ecosystem. So it's perfect for especially the eastern North America here, right? And most of these plants in these books are written about that, about using in this climate zone. So if you're going into your backyard here in St. Louis, where we're at, basically you're just returning to the original forest ecosystem that we had, you know, a couple hundred years ago. Only now you're using a mix of native plants and proven exotics that give you food value and other benefits to being part of that forest ecosystem.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Drew, but Drew is here, and Drew has a startup, Farmplicity, where they're creating a marketplace for local produce grown by farmers and chefs and people that would appreciate it. You know, and they're looking for a lot of this variety. I'm just kind of curious, did you see as he was going past all of that stuff, is that the kind of thing it's like, wow, there's actually a way that you could start thinking about how to connect restaurants with people that are doing, you know, maybe they don't have to be a farmer, maybe there's, you know, could you talk a little bit about, you know, how, you know, would it be possible to build a marketplace from this using something like your tool? Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's definitely a potential. I mean, if people are growing, you know, on their own properties, and they can probably grow more than they need for themselves, there's definitely an opportunity to share the wealth and spread it across different neighborhoods and sell it to different people. There's probably definitely a market for that. I mean, on our platform right now, it's built so it's just businesses can sell to each other, and it kind of takes, I think going into the individual route would lead to some potential, you know, liabilities that we have to cover and things like that as well. But, you know, that's definitely a potential avenue to go down. That could be something that's interesting to look at.
Am I right that, I mean, my assumption is when I go to a restaurant and they serve me a salad that's made out of iceberg or romaine, it's not hard for the restaurant to source iceberg or romaine. If they want different things that are, you know, appeal to, you know, my palate or, you know, my desire for different greens or whatever, that's the kind of thing. Well, that's the kind of thing they're talking about here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this
Well,
isn't-
you know, in North Carolina, South Carolina, I think they have the perennial ramp festival, which are perennial onions. So, and you plant those under your fruit trees, so then you get, you know, nice fresh oniony greens in the springtime, and then you don't have to worry about walking on your plants in the fall when you're harvesting your fruit. So you're looking at all these different ways of incorporating your plants into your system.
You may have answered this question, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but is there a way to calculate the amount of produce that you're bringing out of this? This sounds fantastic. If it's a year-round thing.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just depend on those 2 volumes of books and all that information out there. They're really an amazing resource for that. They're really heavy.
so they must be worth a lot. There's a lot of really good data.
They took the authors like some 7 years to like put together. So,
so is that data something that's objective? I mean, so if you're talking to somebody that's inclined to this, is it really like validating what they want to know? Is it going to convince anybody else, or is it?
I think the idea of permaculture in particular is that we want abundant food production. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love to eat. So being able to get as much food production out of my yard as possible, instead of putting a chain link fence across my yard to keep my dog in. Why don't I plant a vine that I can eat the edible leaves right off of it, right? So that would be a great win-win situation, you know. Or not even do a chain link fence. Plant your certain fruit trees in the right way, and they cross each other. They create a living fence for you, and it's edible. So, and then your neighbor also has an opportunity to eat the ones on the other side. So I'm sure they'll like it too.
We have time for one more question. Steve, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I had a couple things I was, you were talking about lawns. To me, I mean, lawns for people is architectural. It's a flat plane. It looks nice, makes the house look nice. Trees are architectural, or they provide either, they're functional shade maybe, but otherwise they're a fence, they're a barrier, they're a perimeter. When the comment you just made, I plant a vine rather than the fence to keep my dog in the yard. I could see this, you could, and that leads into my next question is, how could someone who has a tree that is specifically that, let's say a border, or it creates a corner of their property, could turn it into one of this? And the other thing I was thinking is value side. You said 365 days a year. The other thing, it sounds like I don't have to touch it. You know, I load it on the front end with my labor, and
right,
and
it is going to be loaded on the front end with some labor. That's one of the biggest issues probably, is that with anything, just getting us started, you know, there's going to be a big influx of labor, bringing in mulch, you know, building the soil fertility, and then over time, it's going to reduce. Now, 15 minutes of labor a week, I mean, that's a guy in California, and he's like, doesn't mind having it look a little messy, right? So the more aesthetic you want to have those standards, the more maintenance you're going to want to put into it. I know at like Shaw Nature Reserve, we got 4 people working in a native plant garden, right? That's designed, native plants are supposed to be like low maintenance. Well, we got 4 people that are in that thing, right? Maintaining that and making it look nice for people to come. So,
but this is a lot of hands off, right? I mean,
eventually, right? That's what it is, right? You just walk out there, you can go, oh wow, this plant right here is like overgrowing my path. I'm going to just chop that off, and I'm going to lay it right here on the ground. I don't have
well,
to
that's
take
what you,
this
that's
to a
what the guy who mows
compost
your
pile.
lawn. Tell him a list. By the way, go by where the tree is and clip out anything that looks bad.
Right.
And no, I think it's interesting. So okay, so I have 6 acres out in Wildwood. 2/3 of it is oak trees and stuff. And so
You should get with Mark and start harvesting some acorns.
well, I am. It's on my list. It's on the kids' list for this weekend. But what I was thinking is, okay, so how do I got all these big oak trees. Mm-hmm. Do I just put a swale on the uphill side of it and then, you know, start planting and create a row of, I mean, how do I take an existing environment where I already have these monstrous trees and do what you're doing?
Well, it is possible, and that's why that book is so heavy, right? Because if you want, you know, they're really simple, right? Doing a swale, looking at the slopes, right? And you're building basically a ditch on contour to have water retention. And then instead of having exposed dirt, you're going to plant as much plant material on top of there. And you're going to use a lot of nitrogen fixing plants on there. So they're fixing nitrogen for your fruit trees, your nut trees, anything else that you want to put on that swale there to go out and harvest later.
So thank you very much, Bob. We're going to take another break. I just want to close with something I just observed, and maybe this is me stating the completely obvious and everybody in the room knew it, but it just occurred to me that what we've been talking about today is really some very big macroeconomic changes. And it's the difference in saying, well, we have a Home Depot and we have a Lowe's and we have fences and we have yards and everything, to what if you went into Home Depot and they already sell plants, right? So what if you went into Home Depot and when you got to the PVC pipe fence display, it said, PVC fence will cost you so much per running foot. If you would like to plant fruit trees, here's the implication that here's what that will cost over 10 years, here's what the PVC will cost over 10 years, here's what you'll produce over 10 years, here's what you'll spend on maintenance over 10 years. So it's really just a completely different way of thinking about what is the product. Is the product solving, you know, is the product a fence? You know, are you solving a fence problem by are you solving a security problem or a boundary or architectural problem by adding more to it instead of like, well, you know, I have to solve that problem. I really don't want my neighbors peeking into my backyard, but I can do it a different way. Right. So it's just a great way to think about that. What we're talking about is a very big shift, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't, you know, it's not a communist thing. It's just a different way of thinking about our problems.
Well, it's like one of my teachers, he kind of coins the punny phrase of, it's not eco-restoration, it's ego restoration. So we kind of have to take a look at ourselves and what is it that we're used to, we're starting to get some good examples out there where people can start going, hey, that's not so bad anymore. Maybe I could do that, you know? So we're starting to change that mental and emotional attachment to, say, lawns and things like that. And that's where some growth and opportunity are for us too. And that's where we got to start on the ground floor and keep getting more examples up there.
Once again, his slides and his presentation.